Thank you very much for coming again to be friend with us tonight and to hear some new interesting thinking. Yesterday there was amazing discussions and I personally met so many very nice people that I'm really honored, and they already like put some fuel in my peace building energy. So I'm very happy to meet you. Uh, First, our speaker tonight is one very popular figure in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mr. Srđan Puhalo. He has very funny and very strange biography, which we always have to read when we are presenting him. But I'm not sure that I will have perfect translation because I would need to explain for Americans a lot of these things like omladinska radna akcija or things like that. I mean, some things which are strange, but I will try to present him in best way, maybe by his words, but also with few my words about him. So about him, he said that he was born in 1972 in Foča because there was no hospital in Kalnovik. He grew up in Kalnovik with help of his parents, family, and Politikin Zabavnik, that was very famous newspaper for the children in that period in ex-Yugoslavia. He was a shepherd when he was young. He was taking care about cows on the village with his grandmother Radojka. And then he realized that life is really hard, especially in Kalnovik. Until 14 years old, he participated in two working actions. That was the place when in Tito Yugoslavia, young people would go to work for free, physically building the trails, the trains, and things like that. So he also visited concentration camp Jasenovac. You learn about Jasenovac already on your preparation. I'm sure you have mentioned that. And he compete on Tito competition, very important in ex-Yugoslavia, which all of us students had to participate. He said that it really influenced his personality very much. And he graduated secondary school in Sarajevo. He graduated psychology in Belgrade. He said that he lost illusions very early and innocency very late. And he survived two wars and huge inflation in Serbia. And then he came to live in Banja Luka. He did his master degree in psychology in Banja Luka, and he did his PhD in psychology in Sarajevo. He said that he's a very good father of two children and very bad husband of one wife. He doesn't have any rewards, and now he put a lot of labels, which usually are people telling about him in media, like that he's paid by international community or by Soros, or that he's anti-Serb, or that he's NGOs, that he's Bakir Serb, speaking about Izetbegovic Serb. And he would like to be professor at university in Sarajevo, not in Banja Luka, at the Faculty of Political Science. And he said that he has a lot of problems with the grammar, with the foreign languages, with his potential, and with cholesterol. I think you know everything about him now, except you don't know that he's very, very important for all of us in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that some group of young people I'm familiar with call him the person of truth, because very often you will really, he's the rare person in Bosnia and Herzegovina who will offer you real truth in media space. That's why we are welcome you, the man of truth, and please tell us something about your favorite or worst subject in your life about Serbs. Rekla sam Srđane da izvolite da nam počneš govoriti, da ćeš govoriti o svojoj najmržoj ili najdražoj temi, a to su Srbi. Izvoli.
Dobro. i koje je doba, ja treba da govorim
I am
o
about to
nečemu što
speak
je,
about something
čini mi se,
that seems to
vrlo
me
zanimljivo, a to je
very
jedna, ajde
interesting,
kažem,
and that is
iz srpske perspektive da
from the
razumijemo
Serbian
Srbe,
perspective to understand the
koji su
Serbs.
negdje se percipiraju kao dežurni
The
krivci na
Serbs
Balkanu.
that are the
Šta nam je za početak
always
potrebno?
guilty at
Potrebno je
Balkan.
da
So what do we
raščistimo
need for the
nešto što se
beginning?
zove
We need
empatija.
to clarify something that's
Šta
called
je to
empathy.
empatija? Empatija je
What
u
is
stvari
empathy?
naša mogućnost da
It is
razumijemo
our possibility
druge
to understand
i
others
da pokušamo da
and to
razumijemo njihova
understand, to
osjećanja.
try to understand their
I zato ću
feelings.
ja danas pokušati da vam
And that's why I will
dočaram
try today to paint a picture for
ko
you
su Srbi
who
i
are
kakva je
Serbs
njihova uloga bila
and what was
i
their
na
role
Balkanu i u Bosni i
at
Hercegovini.
Balkan and also in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Za početak veoma važno je da
For the beginning, something very important
razumijemo neke mitove.
is to understand some of the
Negdje
myths.
percepcija
So
naroda
let's
jednog
say
naroda
the
se
perception
najbolje može
of
vidjeti
one
kroz mitove koji
people
ga prate,
can be most
koji su
understood by the
u njemu
mythology
uvriježeni,
that
koji u njemu
follows that people,
postoje. I
that
možemo
exist
reći
in
da
one
negdje
amongst
imamo
one group of
dva
people.
velika mita na kojih se
And we
oslanjaju
can say that we
Srbi
have two
u
myths
Bosni i
that
Hercegovini, ali i
Serbs
na Balkanu.
have
Prvi
been
mit
leaning
je
onto.
nešto što se zove
The first
kosovski
myth,
mit,
it's
koji
something that
je
is called
nastao
the myth of
davne
Kosovo
1380. godine kada
that
se desila jedna
started
bitka
in the
na Kosovu,
1389, that
koja
one
nije
big
imala
battle
pobjednika, a ta
happened
bitka između
at the Kosovo field.
Srba, srpskog
It
cara
didn't have a
Lazara i
winner, and it
Turaka,
was
gdje
the
je
battle between the
osnovna
Tsar Lazar
dilema
and the
bila
Turks.
među
The
Srbima,
biggest
ili barem
dilemma
se to
there
danas tako
among the
interpretira,
Serbs,
da li izabrati
that's at least
carstvo
what's
zemaljsko,
being
odnosno biti
interpreted today, was
racionalan,
should
ili
we
carstvo nebesko,
choose
a
the
to znači
kingdom of earth
ići u
that is to
borbu
be
protiv
rational, or
višestruko,
to choose the kingdom of heaven
višestruko
that
i
is to
bolje
go
naoružanog
into
i
the
mnogobrojnijeg
big
neprijatelja. Znači, tu je
battle.
bila dilema da li izabrati život ili
Do we
ponos.
choose the life,
I
or do we
danas se
choose
to
the pride?
interpretira da su Srbi izabrali
And
ponos,
today
odnosno
this
da
has
su
been
izabrali
interpreted
da
that
idu u jednu
Serbs
bitku za
chose
koju
pride.
nisu bili sigurni da mogu
They chose
pobijediti.
not to go into this earthly battle
I to
because
je
they were
to,
not sure
ajde
that they were
kažem,
going to win.
carstvo nebesko, gdje
And so this is
Srbi
the
kažu
kingdom
da
of
je
heaven.
bolje, časnije
And they say
poginuti
this
nego
is more
živjeti
important,
kao
this is better.
kukarica.
It is better
Imate još jedan
to
mit,
die
koji
with
nije,
honor than to live as a
koji
coward.
nije samo srpski, ali je
There's
kod
another
nas veoma
myth,
prisutan,
not just
i
Serbian,
to je
but very
taj mit
present.
o žrtvama. Znači,
It's a
Srbi
myth
sebe
of
vrlo često opažaju kao žrtve. Odakle
a
potiče
myth
taj mit?
of
Znači, prije svega
victim,
imamo ono što sam rekao, znači
the
tu bitku na
victimization of
Kosovu, gdje oni
oneself.
idu na višestruko jačeg neprijatelja
So you
i
have the
spremni su da
Kosovo
poginu
field,
zarad
and they are
neke
ready to
slave, zarad
die.
neke
They are
pravde,
ready to die
da
for
ne bi
glory,
bili
for justice,
robovi. Ali ako se
because
vratimo
they don't want to
do
be
Prvog
slaves of the
svjetskog
Turks.
rata,
But if we go back
vidjet ćemo
if we go forward to the
da
First
u
World
tom
War,
ratu su
we will see that
Srbi
in that war,
strahovito
Serbs
stradali. Znači, oni su
had the biggest number of
1914. počinje
casualties.
rat u Sarajevu
In the
i Austro-Ugarska
1940s,
napada
the
Srbiju,
war starts
okupira
in
je
Sarajevo,
nakon
and
4 godine
Austro-Hungarian
1918.
occupies Sarajevo.
godine, kraje Prvog svjetskog rata, Srbi oslobađaju Srbiju.
And so
I u
the
tom
Serbs
ratu je stradalo
free Serbia at the end of the First World War,
stanovnika Srbije.
and the
To vam je negdje, eto, znači, skoro
28%
jedna
of
trećina,
Serbian
svaki treći stanovnik
Serbian
je stradao.
people died.
Od
Every
toga,
third
od tog ukupnog broja
person
žrtava,
who was Serb
2/3 su
died in the
muškarci,
First World
starosti
War.
od 18 do 55
2/3 of them
godina,
were
znači onaj
men,
najproduktivniji,
age
najvitalniji
18
dio stanovništva,
to 25.
od čega je polovina poginula, a 9%
Half
je
of them
bilo
died, 9 of them
invaliditet.
were
Što znači
permanently
da
disabled.
je te žrtve koje su u Prvom svjetskom ratu
So that means that
Srbi
these
podnijeli su bile
victims
strahovito velike i negdje
that
najveće u
happened
odnosu na
were tremendous.
neke druge
And it was the
balkanske
biggest when you
balkanske
compare it to
narode.
other Balkan
Onda je
group of
nastala
people that lived
nešto
in
što se zove
Balkan.
prva Jugoslavija,
And
koja je
then the
trajala
first
do
Yugoslavia
1940. godine
came to
kada počinje
fruition,
Drugi svjetski rat.
which
Za taj
came to
rat
fruition
je
at the beginning of the
karakteristično
Second World War. For that war, what is
da je
specific
recimo da je Jugoslavija bila jedna od rijetkih država u
is
kojem
that
je
Yugoslavia was one of the rare
počela
countries
antifašistička borba.
that started the
U
anti-fascism battle.
to, za razliku od nekih drugih država koje nisu bilo tako intenzivne, znači
Unlike
borbe,
some
ili bili
other
ustanci,
countries that were not that
u Jugoslaviji je
intensive
to bilo veoma,
or they were not rebelling against the
prisutno
fascism,
i to iz nekoliko
it was
razloga.
very present
Ustanci protiv
amongst the
fašista
Serbian
i
people,
nacista, a
and
s druge
that
strane
was
i protiv
for many
njihovih
reasons. These
savezničkih država, kao
rivals
što je
against the
nezavisna država
fascists
Hrvatska,
and
je
Germans
potekla opet od Srba.
and
Zato
DH,
što
which was
su
Croatia,
u
who
toj
was with
nezavisnoj
Nazis.
državi Hrvatskoj dobar dio teritorije bili Srbi, a ona je imala plan, sistematski plan da uništi Srbe. I kad su
The
krenuli to da
problem was
provode, da
that
ubijaju srpski
Croatian
narod,
Nazis wanted
oni
to
su ustali
murder the Serbs. They wanted to
i pobunili se,
annihilate
podigli su
them.
ustanak.
And so they rebelled against that. The Serbs rebelled against that.
Rat je trajao 4
The
godine
war kept going
i odnio je
for 4 years
skoro 1 milion života.
and had
Od toga
almost a million
imamo
casualties.
550.000 Srba, 200.000 Hrvata, 100.000 muslimana,
550,000 Serbs,
a broj Jevreja koji je preživio Drugi
2,100
svjetski rat je recimo
Croatians,
17%.
and
Znači od
100,000
100% Jevreja samo ih je 17
Bosniaks,
preživio. Opet
and
vidimo
70% of
tu
surviving
ulogu
Jews.
žrtve gdje su Srbi, ajde da kažem negdje,
So
podnijeli
again, the Serbs were
najveće žrtve
victims.
i u
They
Drugom
were the
svjetskom
biggest
ratu i u
victims
Prvom svjetskom ratu u odnosu na sve
of the
druge
world wars.
narode bivše Jugoslavije ili na Balkanu.
They were the biggest victims when you
Zašto su
compare them
nam-
to other
zašto vam
people
pričam
and
ove
groups of
priče?
people that lived in
Zašto
Balkan,
pričam o
not
mrtvima?
counting
Zato
the
što
Jewish people.
ta priča o mrtvima je veoma važna kada kreirate ulogu
This story
žrtve.
about the death
Kada razvijate to
is
osjećanje
very
nepravde
important when
i
you are
kad iz toga izranja neka
constructing
vrsta
the feeling of
nacionalizma.
injustice. And out of that
Sada,
comes
kada
the
govorimo o
nationalism.
nacionalizmu,
So when we talk about the
posle Drugog
nationalism,
svjetskog rata, znači desila se
after
druga
the Second World
Jugoslavija,
War,
ona je bila socijalistička,
Second Yugoslavia came to fruition. It was a
gdje smo imali
socialist
jednog vođu, jednu
Yugoslavia.
partiju,
We had
imali smo
one
izbore
leader,
koji su
one
u principu
party.
bili
We
besmisleni,
had elections
ali
that were really
bio je jedan,
meaningless.
ideologija je bila takva da se
But there
zasnivala
was
na
one
nečem što se zvalo
ideology
bratstvo i jedinstvo. Gdje je
that
nacionalizam
was
bio nešto
based on
retrogradno, nešto
brotherhood.
loše, nešto zaostalo i nastojalo se da se to prevaziđe kroz
And
neku
so
ideologiju koja je
they
afirmisala
wanted to
zajedništvo,
come
slogu,
together as
brisala je
togetherness
etničke
through
razlike između
brotherhood.
naroda.
This
Čak je
Yugoslavia
išlo dotle
erased
da se
all these
nije
indifferences
govorilo i
between
o
the
zločinima
groups
nad
of
jednim, drugim
people.
ili trećim narodima,
It
samo da
went
bi se,
so far
ajde
that
kažem, taj
it
nacionalizam
it was
suzbio.
it
Ali
stopped talking about the
nacionalizam je vrlo
casualties in the
žilava,
world wars.
žilava
But
biljka i teško je iskorijeniti.
nationalism
Tako
is
da
a
se negdje
very
krajem
hard
sredinom 70. godina polako taj
plant, and it's
nacionalizam vraća,
hard
ne
to
samo
get
kod
its
Srba,
root.
ali
So at the
kod
beginning of
Srba prvo
90s, the
recimo
nationalism
dolazi
started coming back
najprije
with
u kulturi,
Serbs,
a onda u politici. Znači
especially in the
pojavljuju se
culture,
neke drame,
and then
pojavljuju se
afterwards
neke
in the
knjige
politics. So
u kojima se
in the
govori
80s, some books started,
da su
some
Srbi pobjednici u ratu, a
art
gubitnici u
started
miru, gdje
that
kažu
started
da
saying
mi
that
smo
Serbs
podnijeli najveće žrtve
were
i u Prvom i
were
u
the
Drugom
losers in
svjetskom
the
ratu,
war, but they were the
a od
winners
toga
in the
nismo imali
peace.
nikakve koristi.
They started saying how they didn't have any rewards
Srbi su
for all the
gubitnici,
casualties they
drugi
had in
mnogo
the
bolje
world
žive
wars.
i mnogo bolje se
Serbs
razvijaju
were
od nas.
losers. Other
To
groups
vrlo često
are
nije bilo
living better.
tačno.
They are
Nije
evolving
takve
better.
stvari, takva retorika nije
That
bila bazirana
simply
i potkrepljena
was
činjenicama,
not
ali
true.
negdje
That
prijala
rhetoric was not
velikom
based on the
broju
facts,
ljudi da sebe
but
sagledaju
it really
kao
hit the
dobre
spot
ratnike
for a
i
lot of people, a lot
kao
of Serbs.
žrtve.
because they started talking about the
Šta se dešava?
victimization again.
Znači, već 80.
So what
godina
happens?
20. vijeka,
In the 80s of the 20th century,
polako, posle Titove smrti predsjednika,
slowly
vječnog
but surely,
predsjednika
after
Jugoslavije,
the Tito died,
polako
the forever
dolazi
president
do
of Yugoslavia,
animoziteta među narodima,
slowly but
odnosno
surely
među
the
republikama koje
animosity
su
between
činile
groups of people
tu
starts to come and
Jugoslaviju.
starts to be
I
seen
počinje
in
da se gradi
Yugoslavia.
priča o
And
razdruživanju.
so this story
Da, svaka
started
od tih
going
republika
that
kojih je bilo
that
7 ili
every
8,
of
ne znam ja
these
sad tačno,
republics should
da
go their own way and be
postanu
independent,
nezavisne države.
to become
Naravno, Srbima se
independent
to nije svidjelo,
countries. Of course, Serbs did not
jer
like
oni su
this
htjeli da naprave državu u kojoj
because
će
they
svi Srbi
wanted to
živjeti
make
u jednoj
a
u jednoj
country where
državi.
all
A
Serbs
to
will live in
znači
one
da
country, one
neke
big
republike
country.
ne mogu postati nezavisne,
And
pa
so
i
that
Bosna
would
i
mean
Hercegovina,
that some
ili
of
mogu
the
postati
countries could not be
nezavisne,
independent,
ali
like
moraju
Bosnia and
dijeliti
Herzegovina.
teritorije tih
Or they
republika
can
da
be
se
independent, but they
pripoje
have to share their
Srbiji,
territory with
tamo gdje su
Serbia,
većina
and they
Srbi.
have to
I to je
admit
bilo
that
i
this
u
is the
Hrvatskoj,
Serbian
to je bilo i u
land.
Bosni
This happened in
i
Croatia,
Hercegovini.
and this happened in Bosnia and
Pošto na to
Herzegovina.
nisu pristali drugi narodi,
Because other
došlo
people,
je
of course, said no
90.
to
godina
this,
do rata.
in the 90s, the war started.
U Bosni i Hercegovini je za
In
3,5
Bosnia and
godine rata
Herzegovina,
stradalo oko
for
100.000
3.5
ljudi,
years of war,
najviše
100,000
Bošnjaka,
people died,
oko
mostly
65.000,
Bosniaks.
od toga polovina su civili.
65,000 of them. Half
Oko
of them were civilians.
29.000 Srba, od toga su oko
29,000 Serbs.
5-6.000 Srbi,
5 or 6,000
oko
Serbs,
7.700 Hrvata, od toga
7,000 Croats,
civili i 2.100
civilians,
je stradalo civila među
and
Hrvatima.
then 2,000 of civilians
Zašto je
among
to
the
važno?
Croats. Why is this important?
U tom ratu skoro
In
cjelokupno
that war,
rukovodstvo
almost the entire
Srba
establishment
je
of the
optuženo
Serbs
i osuđeno za ratne zločine.
was
Postavlja se
trialed
pitanje
for
zašto?
the
Šta
war
je u pozadini?
criminals.
Šta
Why?
je u pozadini tih zločina?
What is behind this? What is behind these crimes?
Pozadini tih zločina je bio taj nacionalizam.
The background of these crimes
Gdje
was
su
nationalism.
kroz taj nacionalizam opravdavani
Through this
vršeni ti
nationalism, a
zločini.
lot of
A to
atrocities
znači da se
were
nama ne bi
justified.
ponovilo
And so this was
prvi
the
svjetski
rhetoric.
rat, ponovio
In
drugi
order
svjetski
not
rat gdje
to
su Srbi najviše stradali,
relive the First
onda
and
je bila
Second
neka
World War,
logika
where
da
Serbs had the
mi
biggest
napravimo neke,
casualties, it
ajde
is
kažem,
illogical
preventivne
now
zločine da bi to spriječili.
that we make the preventive
I to je
crimes so
sada,
that this doesn't happen.
ajde kažem, problematično. Veoma je teško
And so now this is, of
prihvatiti
course,
da
problematic.
ste
It is
radili
very hard
zločine.
to
I to nije
accept
samo
that
problem Srba,
you did
to je
something
problem
bad.
Njemaca iz
And
Drugom
this is not
svjetskom
just the
ratu.
problem of Serbs,
Zato
it's
ste
the
prošli
problem
kroz
of
taj proces
Germans in the Second World War.
denacifikacije.
That's why
Veoma je
they
teško
went through
vjerovatno i
the
da
process
Amerikancima i pored
of
toliko godina
ratification.
pričaju o onome
Of
što se
course, with
dešavalo
Americans
u
as well,
Vijetnamu, a da ne govorimo o zločinima
they
iz
still don't
posljednjih
talk about the
ratova u
Vietnam.
Iraku,
They
u
still don't talk about the
Afganistanu,
Iraq,
u
Afghanistan,
zemljama gdje su oni ratovali i gdje su
in the countries where America was being in war and
počinjeni
where
zločini
they
koji
did
se sada
atrocities towards the local
nazivaju
people
kolateralna
that
šteta
now they call a
modernim
collateral
jezikom.
damage with a modern
I to je to neko breme
lingo.
koje danas
And this is
pritišće
the burden that
Srbe
pushes
na Balkanu
the
i u Bosni
Serbs and
i Hercegovini.
at Balkan and Bosnia
To,
and Herzegovina.
ajde kažem, to je negdje sasvim
So to
okej
say, this is
sa stanovišta psihologije. Veoma je teško
okay
prihvatiti
from
da ste vi loši, da
the
ste
point
radili
of
neke
psychology.
zločine.
It
I
is
opet
very
ponavljam,
hard
to
to
nije
say that
samo
you are
problem
bad,
Srba, to
that
je
you
problem
did some
svakog
crimes.
naroda,
And
pa
I
čak možemo
say
reći
again,
svakog
this is not just the problem of
pojedinca.
Serbs.
Ali
This
s
is the
druge
problem
strane,
of every human
činjenice
being.
govore da se to
But on the other
desilo.
hand, the facts
I
say
sada
that this happened.
zamislite kako je
And
teško
so now, imagine how
pomiriti
hard it is to make these
te dvije strane.
to
Znači, s jedne strane vas
these two
opažaju kao
sides to
zločince,
put them
a s
in
druge
peace.
strane vi
With
sebe
one hand you
želite
have the
da
atrocities, and on
prikažete
the other hand
kao
you want
žrtvu.
to
I to je
present
neka ta
yourself
borba
as a
koju
victim.
danas
And so this is the
Srbi na
battle
Balkanu
that right now the
vode
Serbs at Balkan are going through.
unutar sebe.
And this happens internally. And so what is also important to understand in this story is that in this context, when we talk about the atrocities that Serbs did towards other groups of people, you have the political leaders who refuse to talk about this. Even though you have many Hague court saying that this happened, that Serbs who did this are now I need a word, Brian. So the Serbs say that we don't accept this, even though the Hague says that we did this crimes, we do not accept it, because Hague, we do not accept Hague. We do not say this is a correct court.
Govori se puno o zločinima nad drugim ljudima. Ali kad treba govoriti o zločinima na Srbima,
when it's about to talk against the Serbs, then Serbs love to talk about that. But when it comes to talking about the atrocities towards other group of people, Serbs are really hesitant to talk about that. So all of this really leads you to start believing in a mythology of a victimization. And this is one different aspect that we didn't have in the First and Second World War, but we did have it in the War of 90s. And so many times when you talk with Serbs, when you talk about the 90s and what happened in the 90s, they tell you a counter argument from the First and Second World War, and they put this connection to justify their picture about themselves. They want to say that they were the victims, and this is justified. This is very important, and also a crucial role here is the role of religion. Serbs are Orthodox Christians. And Serbian Orthodox Church plays a huge role in the image of Serbs, in the creation of their identity, in the creation of the process in the media. It has a tremendous role. What is really important is this link between religion and nationalism is very strong. And the church, the Orthodox Church, doesn't have the role to give the moral or universal messages where they will say that everything bad is bad. But the church is really there to give forgiveness for everything that happened in the past, in the 90s, actually, again, to give a picture about the self-victimization. We are the victims, and these others, they are who did the atrocities. It's their fault. In the 90s, the church had the role to justify all these atrocities with the story and narrative it gave. That Serbs are more important than other people, that they are more valuable than other people, that killings of others is not that bad because they are the rejects. They said no to Serbs. And then the church also said the church has to be with the people, and so the church has to have the justification for the people and everything that happened in that period amongst those people. And so then you have one paradox where you learn about the 10 Commandments, and then on the other hand you have the glorification of people that did these atrocities that are now in Hague in court. And if you are rational, if you are it's very hard to make peace with this. But if you have patriotism in front of morality, then the role of the church is very important to give you an alibi for everything that happened in the 90s. Also, something really important to point out is that Serbia, when it came to socialism, the religion was put in the background. But now the church is tied with government, and the church supports this whole rhetoric of negating the atrocities in the 90s. And together with the politicians that are governing, creates such a schizophrenic point of view. When we talk today and when we try to understand the Serbs, you have to have this this on your mind. That in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is no such thing as a goodwill amongst politicians, no matter what group of people you talk about. There is no politic will to deal with the 90s. Why? Because every group of these people love to talk about how they are the victims and they are not the perpetuators. When you look at local media, you cannot read about other victims. You can only read or talk about your own victims. I was analyzing the way people write, and you have this fantastic situation. When you talk about your victims, then you take the arguments from your attorneys who were defending you. And when you are accusing, you take the arguments from the lawyers that were against you. But that is incredible how it is so especially made that you talk about the victimization. And this is the word also with Serbs. And logically and realistically, the Serbs made the biggest atrocities in the 90s. The entire establishment of the 90s in Serbia was processed in court. But to make it complicated, as everything is in Bosnia and Herzegovina, other group of peoples are not innocent as well. When war started, Sarajevo was in siege. But also with Bosniaks and Croats, some Serbs lived in Sarajevo as well in the beginning of 90s. One war commander, self-initially, took the Serbs. He was bullying them. Some of them he even killed. I talk about Sarajevo that was in siege from the Serbs. He, as a Bosniak, as a general of war general, he killed some of the Serbs, and he pushed them in the ground. 25 years after the war stopped, Sarajevo does not remember this. Does not remember the victims of Serbians. This trench is called Kazani, and none of the officials say that yes, in the city in the 90s, some Serbs were victims and they died just because they were Serbs. These things and similar things like this give Serbs an alibi and a possibility to see themselves as victims, not as perpetrators. And you will remember that I was talking about the empathy at the beginning. We have a huge problem with empathy here. As long as the Bosniaks here in Sarajevo do not have the understanding for the victims of Serbs, for the Serbian victims, we will have serious problem of living in togetherness in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As long as Serbs don't have the empathy for all the Bosnian victims, for all the Croat victims, we will have problem with living together. Today, that looks pretty masked. We go to Federation, Bosniaks and Croats go to Republika of Srpska, we work, we communicate, but there are taboos that we just do not go there. We do not talk about that. It's the taboos of the 90s in which we have so many disagreements in so many topics. The character of the war, who was the perpetrator, who was the hero, are these courts justified? Are they just or not? I'm afraid that behind this somewhat normality in the everyday life, we have such big differences that in the future might unfortunately be misused for new instabilities and new battles and wars. That's why it is very important from one side to understand that in this war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbs were the perpetrators, but also it is crucially important to know that some Serbs also died and were killed by the other groups. Only like that we can truly and honestly and humanly understand the other abbreviation enemy side. Today that is not the case. And I can give you countless examples, even though 25 years has passed from the end of the war in the 90s. What is the relationship with elite politicians towards the victims of the war? Speaks best that we still don't have the exact number of people that died during the war. The Hague and Tribunal in Hague did this. Some NGOs started doing this, but the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina never officially did this, never has done this. That's why it is extremely important that when we speak about these things, that we are fair and honest to ourselves and others, to admit where we went wrong, but also to look for justice for ourselves and for our victims as well. I said Bosniaks died, casualties were the biggest in the Bosniak people in the war of the 90s. They had the biggest casualties from the side of the Serbs. And if we keep this a secret, and if we ignore this, that is just a preparation for some future war. But also, from the 29,000 of Serbs that died, you have 5,000 civilians that died as well among the Serb people. We have to understand these victims. We have to find the people who were responsible, who killed these people, who killed these civilians as well. Why am I telling you this? When you try to understand what was going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina or what was going on in Balkans, the picture is far away from the black and white. There are many shades in between. A lot of but. And we are masters of justification of the atrocities, but also we are masters of of putting something, making something bigger than it is. And so when you're trying to understand the first and the seconds and the thirds, it is crucially important to hear the stories of the all three sides. Maybe it will be hard for you to understand. It will be hard for you to listen to these stories. But I think that it is so important that we listen, that we find time to listen to the stories of the first and seconds and thirds, to ask questions to all three sides. That is the way how to grow empathy towards one another. Not just to say who was right, who was wrong, but to understand the roots of battles, to understand, not to justify it, but to understand it. To understand what was behind all of these wars. What were the fears? What were the stereotypes? What were the myths behind this? And also, what were the mistakes? I'm talking this as a psychologist. I'm telling this as a psychologist because that is the only way how we can come across the trauma. This was not talked about in socialism that was almost 40 years long. We were going forward in that time. People really love this time of socialism in Balkan, but we had 45 years of peace, so that after those 45 years we would slaughter each other, that we were slaughtering each other in the Second World War as well. I know this sounds ridiculous, but the wrongdoing of this in the Second World War was not forgotten by the Serbs 45 years later. That's why it's important when you talk about all three sides, not just on a politics side, to understand what stands behind the fears, what stands behind the reactions, to understand, not to justify them, but to try to understand and to openly and publicly speak about these things, because that's the only way how we can stop some other atrocities in the future. I think we're going to have to stop now. It is hard to understand by people from Balkan in 20 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Srđan.
Thank you.
We apologize, we make it a little bit longer, but in the preparation session, we agree that we will let Srđan a little bit longer to speak. I beg other speakers to not follow this because this was a unique chance to hear something like that from a Serbian perspective, and we really appreciate it. Now I will invite Brian to put us in the groups. Srđane, mi imamo malo jedan sad naš običaj za možda da nas sačekaš 20 minuta. Mi ćemo malo u grupama pripremiti pitanja i onda se vraćamo da te pitamo direktno. Jel može?
Važi.
Ok, Brian?
Također to je bilo pitanje od naše grupe.
And that was a question from our group as well.
Mogu oni pomoći?
Kako bi oni to mogli učiniti?
How they could have done it.
Oproštenje za druge, okay. Ali također
the forgiveness for others, but
Mirela, znači ako prevodiš ti, najbolje da Srđan ovo komentarše, pa neko onda...
It would be the best for Srđan to comment this.
Ja mogu?
Može.
Znači, ovako, kada govorimo o suočavanju sa svojim zločinima,
facing your own atrocities towards other people groups,
crkva tu
the church
nije mnogo
hasn't done a lot. We have a situation that people that were tried for atrocities who are Serbs, they are glorified and they present them as saints, as victims. And this is spoke about publicly, and church leaders talk about this publicly. And this is a dominant narrative among the Serbs and among the Serbian Orthodox Church. On the other hand, there are some people that inside the Serbian Church, but they are in small number. They are outnumbered and they are quiet. They want to think differently when we talk about other people's victims. What is also important is what I said in this entire story is that Serbian Orthodox Church is compatible to political elite in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Serbian political elite, and also in Serbia, the state of Serbia political elite. And there are no big disagreements among them when it comes to the 90s and the casualties and victims. When we talk about our own victims, when Serbs talk about their own victims, it is very unison. Political elite and the church have the same narrative. And that means that we talk about our victims with no problems. We talk about them without any problem. Especially when we talk about the army who died. They died in the name of justice. They died in the name of defense of the Serbian people. If we talk about the civilians, then we talk about the victims who are innocent and who died for without any reason whatsoever. And this is where the picture of Serbian Orthodox Church is pretty black and white. We are the victims, they are the perpetrators, and this is a dominant story. On the other hand, I don't see that in other confessions there is a lot of preparedness to talk differently as well. If they don't affirm and they don't if they don't talk about the atrocities, it's all declarative. Because you cannot condemn a crime and then after condemning this crime to sit with these people that are affirming these crimes. And this is where I see one insincerity of Serbian Orthodox Church, but also other religious confessions when we talk about facing of what happened in the 90s. And I also don't see the readiness to cross one line in which the victims would be victims no matter what their ethnic and religious background is, where the crime is the universal thing, not the thing of an ethnic group. Because what is really close to me is that Islam and Orthodoxy and Catholicism have clear moral values. And if we dirty them with nationalism, then that's not it anymore. Then it's not universal, but it's a thing of manipulation and malice interpretation of religion in the to say that you are a victim and to negate the crime. We have interreligious council in Bosnia and Herzegovina that is supposed to do something about better understanding between the ethnic groups, between the religions. But this is more form. It's not really there isn't a true change, because these religious groups talk one thing when they are among themselves, and then they talk completely differently when they are amongst the people. And this is the core of hypocrisy, today's hypocrisy of today's religion. With Serbs, but also, I'm afraid, with other groups as well. I hope I was clear.
Ja mislim da potpuno da.
I think that you were completely clear.
Mi imamo još jedno pitanje. Naši prijatelji Amerikanci su ga vidjeli napisano na chatu. Evo ja sad volim Muhameda da se direktno javi, da direktno prokomentariše i pita Srđana da ne bi ja prevodila njegovo pitanje.
So that I don't translate it.
Hvala Amram puno. Ovako prije svega moram da kažem da mi je zadovoljstvo da slušam gospodina Puhala. Ovo je stvarno odlično izlaganje i vrlo objektivno, vrlo transparentno. Mislim da nam svima treba, svim nacionalnim zajednicama i na Balkanu, a i u svijetu ovakvog razgovora. Ono što mene interesuje, gospodine Puhalo, je sljedeće u stvari. Moja teorija nekako je da
like this. What I like to know, Mr. Puhalo, is my theory is that under the Ottoman Empire, Serbs created a complex, just like the Bosniaks, just like the Croats that were under the siege or under the ruling of Ottomans or Austro-Hungarians. It doesn't matter. And they also inherited part of their mythologies as well. As far as I'm concerned, the most important mythology really comes from the Ottoman Empire. This is where the evilness of this mythological consciousness really starts. And later on, the Serbs inherited this because they tried to be the big nation as well. Just like the Turks are, just like the Ottoman Empire was. And they are acting like Serbian government, they're acting like Serbian leadership in government, continuing to build this myth about the big Bosniak nation. Do you think that there is some kind of a correlation, like I saw, between that, and in which to what measure the religion, in which measurement they really talk for these modalities. Now, I am a psychologist, but I want to read a lot, but so I don't know how much I will be right in this, but I will tell you what I think. My personal opinion. Before everything, we in Balkan were free for a very short period of time. We were always under someone else's ruling. And of course, this affected everything, our entire lives. On one hand, you have the story of the Bosniaks, of the Muslims in the Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Serbia that say, oh, it wasn't that bad under the Turks. You had some kind of autonomy. We had some kind of identity, blah, 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 so on. On the other hand, you have Christians who say, so-called Christians, it would be a lot better. We had a lot better time under Austro-Hungarian. And then Muslims say, no, 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 then we were really marginalized and you were favorized. You were Catholics and you were favorized. But what's the point of all of this? When first Yugoslavia was created or established, Bosnia and Herzegovina with Macedonia and Kosovo was behind. We see that not even Turks or Austro-Hungarian did anything for the people, but they did everything for themselves. The illiteracy was the biggest. There were no schools. The role of the woman was catastrophe.
feudalizma
where we from feudalism just turned into socialism without the capitalism at all. Of course, this brings many consequences. On the other hand, when you have nationalism, the characteristics of nationalism is this imagination of the past times. These are the golden times. I, as a Serb, of course, would love to have the Dušan Car, that Serbia is big, that everything is ours, that everyone listens to us. The Bosniaks are imagining and thinking about the Turkish Empire. They think about the King Tvrtko, the Croats talk about the Austro-Hungarians. But this whole time, of course, we are imagining about the time when we were the slaves of the big authorities. So without these nationalities from all the sides, nationalism would be hard for it to exist. So I see this as a merge of plates. If one plate was missing, the other plate would fall apart as well. So nationalism stands because it stands on all three sides. I am afraid that today in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have something that is the domination of all three nationalisms. Where they don't give space any other ideology, any other philosophy of life. That's why, of course, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Republika Srpska, when you say a citizen, you cannot give someone a biggest offend than to tell him he's a citizen. And that's something that does not give the flourishing of the nationalistic, of the national identity. You can be Bosniak, you can be Croat, you can be Serb, but when you say when you are Bosnian and Herzegovinian, it's like a heretic. He's a loser that has nothing in life. He will do nothing in life just because he chose different option. He's Bosnian and Herzegovinian. Who are you? You do not belong to anyone. And so we need to think about these things. Where is all this going? I can give you many examples that give many arguments that say that my story stands. If I knew what the right answer for Bosnia and Herzegovina is, I would be a politician and I would go to the elections, but I really don't know. I don't know what's the solution for nationalism, but what I do know is that what has been done today is not good for the people and for this country.
Imamo još jedno pitanje, pa da možemo da završimo. Može?
We have one more question.
I'm going to say one more question and then we'll be wrapping it up, but I think you all have translation, so never mind.
Mm-hmm.
Vjerujem da će spomenik na Kazanima biti uskoro napravljen. Da li je nerealno da srpska strana napravi nešto slično?
So it's the question from Orhan Hadžigić. You can read it in the chat.
Od strane srpske vojske.
Vidite, vi imate tu jedan problem.
You have one problem here.
Takvih spomenika ima u Republici Srpskoj.
This kind of monuments exist in Serbia, but they are ignored.
Jednostavno se ignorišu.
They are simply being ignored.
Prolazimo kao da ne postoje.
We walk by them just like they do not exist. Children do not learn about this in schools. You have Omarska, Keraterm.
Šta je treće? kod Prijedora tu postoje obilježja.
Next to Prijedor you have monuments.
Obilježja.
But monuments are for nothing if that is not in public discourse. If this is not mentioned. If people that did these atrocities don't show up on the commemoration, then this just stays on a level of one group of people coming to the monument to see themselves as victims, and no one else cares. But again, we come back to empathy. This is where we do not show empathy. And a very interesting question about kazani is being asked.
Stradalim u kazanima. Treba da bude u kazani, na kazanima ili negdje u gradu.
Should we have the commemoration for Kazani at Kazani or somewhere in the middle of the city? Because if we put it at Kazani, then no one can see it. Who will go to the mountain to see this monument? That's the same story as the story of the killed children in Prijedor. It's not the problem that this monument is being present, but where should be present? Is it in the middle of the city? So that it is a monument of our shame? Or that we say, yes, there is a monument, but no one sees it, no one visits it. Because the meaning of the monument is to keep us to make us remember, what happened, to give us a memory of what atrocities happened. Otherwise, it is meaningless to have monuments. Can you please mute yourself? And so we cannot put this just on Kazani, and we cannot put this just on Prijedor. We cannot actually put this just on the small cities. We have to think about the entire. We have to think about the entire way of how we treat the victims. I would love if we talked about this in schools instead of just putting a commemoration or monument somewhere. If we talked about this in media, if we talked about this in TV, in schools, then this would be a way towards the questioning of our role in the war. This would come to questions, come to emotions. Children would start asking really awkward questions to their parents, to their teachers, to the system, and that would make sense. But as long as this is just a monument as a stone, piece of stone, or some letters, I'm afraid this is just a form. This is not the great meaning of that. I think this is a beautiful answer, and it shows that importance of remembering. You didn't talk about Kazani just so that you can say that Serbs died, but you actually talked about victims in general and empathy. To talk about the victims, that they are equal no matter what group they're coming from. This is why I don't like questions, but what about this? What about that? It's a thing where we treat victims the same, equally, from all three sides. Not ethnically, but humanely. That is the message for the future.
Thank you so much, everyone. We really were honored, and it was a pleasure to have you here, to listen to you. We will have also a great session at 8 o'clock with Adnan Hasanbegovic with a very similar but other perspective Bosniak. So please be here 5 minutes earlier and see you soon. Srđane, mi sad imamo u 8 s Adnanom Hasanbegovićem bošnjački narativ. Ako imaš snage, Bujrum, pridruži nam se. Mi bi voljeli. ako možeš.
Evo moram reći šta mi je sa ženom i sa djecom, vezao sam i za radijator i nasuo vode da ne dehidriraju pa da vidim jesu živi, zdravi.
Ajde, ako te puste, tipni se na link i uđi.
Važi.
Ako ne, hvala na svemu.
Ništa, hvala vama.
See you soon, everyone.
See everyone soon in about 35 minutes.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Salam.
Salam. Peace be with you all.
Salam.